The medical bay of the Asclepius Prime hummed with quiet efficiency. Soft blue lights glowed from the ceiling panels, casting gentle shadows across rows of healing pods. The air smelled clean, almost sterile, with a faint chemical scent that all hospitals seemed to share regardless of which planet they orbited. Dr. Velthar moved between the occupied pods with practiced grace, his four eyes scanning the readouts that floated in holographic displays above each patient. Velthar had worked as a physician for 32 standard years.
In that time, he had treated hundreds of species from across the galaxy.
He knew the biology of Centaurian hive minds, the delicate nervous systems of the crystalline shardborn, and the complex triple heart circulation of his own Xylothian people. He prided himself on his knowledge and his steady hands. Very few medical emergencies surprised him anymore. That was about to change. The emergency alarm shattered the peaceful quiet of the medical bay. Red lights began pulsing along the walls. A mechanical voice announced incoming casualties from a firefight on Station Kepler 7. Velthar's assistant, a young Xylothian named Min-Su Choi, rushed to prepare the emergency treatment area. They worked together smoothly, laying out surgical tools and activating the trauma scanners. The airlock door hissed open. Two figures stumbled through, supporting a third between them. The injured one left a trail of dark red blood on the white floor. Velthar gestured urgently toward the nearest examination table. The two supporters, both human mercenaries by the look of their combat armor, hauled their companion onto the table with surprising gentleness. Velthar approached and immediately understood the severity of the situation. The injured human was a male, probably in his early 30s by human aging standards. His name patch read, Ji-Woo Kim. A massive plasma burn had torn through his abdomen, creating a hole the size of Velthar's fist. The wound had cauterized the edges, but blood still pumped steadily from deeper vessels. Through the gap, Velthar could see damaged internal organs. The doctor's medical training took over. His hands moved automatically, reaching for diagnostic tools even as his mind calculated the odds of survival. The scanner confirmed what his eyes already told him. The plasma bolt had destroyed the human's liver, punctured his stomach, and severed the major artery that supplied blood to the lower body. By every standard in the Galactic Medical Database, this injury was 100% fatal. Velthar turned to Min-Su and spoke quietly in their native language. They needed to prepare the death rites. It was the humane thing to do. The human had perhaps 5 minutes before blood loss shut down his brain. They could make him comfortable, ease the pain, and contact his family if he had one. Then Ji-Woo opened his eyes and spoke. His voice was rough but clear. He asked for water. One of his companions, a woman with short black hair, laughed despite the tears on her face. She told him he was an idiot for getting shot. Ji-Woo managed a weak smile and made a joke about the enemy's bad aim. If they had better aim, he said, they would have missed him completely. Velthar stood frozen in confusion. The human should not be conscious. The pain alone should have triggered shock and unconsciousness. The blood loss should have caused his brain to shut down. Yet here he was, talking and joking as if he had received nothing more than a minor cut. Min-Su touched Velthar's arm and pointed at the scanner display. The readings made no sense. Ji-Woo's blood pressure was dropping, yes, but not as rapidly as it should. His heart rate had increased to compensate, pumping harder to move the remaining blood through his system. His body temperature was rising, climbing toward what should be dangerous levels for a mammalian species, but most impossibly the bleeding was slowing. Velthar looked closer at the wound. The blood that had been flowing freely just moments ago was beginning to thicken. Clots were forming at the edges of the damaged vessels, not the small, delicate clots that took hours to develop in most species. These were thick, aggressive formations that plugged the wounds like emergency sealant foam. The doctor's training finally caught up with his shock. He began working, not to prepare death rites, but to actually treat the patient. He cleaned the wound, applied coagulation enhancers that probably were not needed, and began the process of tissue regeneration. All the while, his mind raced with questions. Ji-Woo remained conscious through the entire procedure. He complained about the pain, which was understandable. He asked about his teammates, worried more about them than himself. He even apologized for bleeding on the clean floor. Velthar found himself answering automatically, his four eyes never leaving the impossible healing process happening before him. The female mercenary, who introduced herself as Dayun Shin, explained what had happened. Their squad had been hired to protect a cargo shipment. Pirates had ambushed them near the station. The fight had been quick and brutal. Jiwoo had taken the plasma bolt while covering their retreat. He had kept fighting for another 2 minutes before his legs finally gave out. 2 minutes. Velthar tried to imagine any other species continuing to fight with a hole through their abdomen. He could not. Most would have been dead before they hit the ground. An hour passed. Then 2. Jiwoo should have died a dozen times over by now. Instead, he was stable. Not healthy, not by any measure, but stable. His body had stopped the bleeding almost entirely through its own mechanisms. The wound still gaped open, but it was no longer an immediate death sentence. Velthar called for Dr. Una Park, the only human physician on the Asclepius Prime. She arrived within minutes, took one look at Jiwoo, and nodded calmly. She asked Velthar what seemed to be the problem. The Xylothian doctor gestured helplessly at the massive wound. This, he said, should have killed the patient instantly. Una smiled gently. She explained that humans were remarkably difficult to kill. Their bodies had evolved on a planet that constantly tried to end them. Predators, diseases, injuries, infections. Human biology had developed extreme responses to survive these threats. What looked like imminent death to other species was merely a serious injury to a human. Velthar listened in amazement as Una described human healing capabilities. The aggressive clotting factors, the redundant organ systems, the ability to function on partial organs, the immune response that would kill most aliens through sheer intensity, all of it was normal for humans. As the night shift began, Jiwoo finally drifted into sleep, sedated by pain medication but alive and stable. Velthar stood beside the examination table, his 4 eyes studying the human with new fascination. In 32 years of practice, he thought he had seen everything. Now he realized how much he still had to learn. The galaxy was full of wonders, and humanity might be one of the strangest of all. The first critical hour passed, then the second, then the third. Each minute that Jiwoo Kim remained alive felt like a small miracle to Dr. Velthar. The Xylothian physician had canceled his other appointments and devoted his full attention to observing the human patient. He had placed every monitoring device available around the examination table, creating a web of sensors that tracked each biological process in precise detail. The readings fascinated and disturbed him in equal measure. Jiwoo's body temperature had climbed to 39.5 degrees Celsius. For most mammalian species in the database, such a fever indicated severe illness or imminent organ failure. The brain should be cooking. Proteins should be denaturing. Critical enzymes should be failing. Yet Jiwoo's brain activity remained normal. He drifted in and out of consciousness, but when awake, he spoke clearly and knew where he was. Dr. Una Park checked on them every few hours. She reviewed the monitoring data with a calm expression that Velthar found almost frustrating. Did nothing about this alarm her? She explained patiently that the fever was purposeful. The human body raised its temperature to fight infection and speed up cellular repair. Yes, it was uncomfortable. No, it was not dangerous unless it climbed much higher. Velthar looked at the wound again. The bleeding had stopped completely now. Thick scabs covered the damaged blood vessels, dark red and surprisingly solid. Around the edges of the wound, the tissue had begun to swell. Una identified this as inflammation, another human healing response. White blood cells were flooding the area, destroying any bacteria or foreign material, clearing away dead tissue to make room for new growth. The scanner showed the white blood cell count. Velthar stared at the numbers, certain they must be wrong. He recalibrated the device and scanned again. The numbers remained the same. Jiwoo's white blood cell count had increased by 300%. In a Xylothian, such a massive immune response would indicate septic shock. The immune system would be attacking the body itself, causing more damage than any infection could. But in Jiwoo, this overwhelming immune response was simply doing its job. Aggressively, yes, but effectively. Una explained that human immune systems had evolved to overreact. Better to deploy too many white blood cells than too few. Better to risk some collateral damage than allow an infection to spread. On Earth, their homeworld, infections could kill quickly. The human body had learned to respond with overwhelming force. Min-Soo Choi assisted Velthar with the monitoring, equally amazed by what they were witnessing. Min-Soo had graduated from medical school only 2 years ago, but he had studied the same databases, learned the same principles. Everything they had been taught said this patient should be dead. Yet here was Jiwoo, complaining about being hungry and asking if someone could bring him his handheld gaming device from his quarters. By the end of the first day, the swelling had increased. The skin around the wound felt hot to the touch. The tissue had turned dark red and purple, colors that indicated damaged blood vessels and pooling fluids. In any other species, Velthar would have been preparing for emergency surgery to drain the infection and remove dead tissue. Yuna told him to wait and observe. On the second day, something changed. The swelling began to decrease. The angry red color started to fade to pink. When Velthar carefully cleaned the wound, he noticed something impossible. New tissue had begun to form, not the slow, careful regeneration that required weeks of treatment and specialized equipment. This was fast, aggressive growth, cells multiplying at rates that should trigger cancer warnings. But it was not cancer. It was healing. The new tissue looked different from the surrounding healthy skin. It was pinker, shinier, lacking the normal texture. Yuna called it granulation tissue. She explained that this was the first stage of wound closure. The body was filling in the gap with temporary tissue, building a scaffold that other cells could use to regenerate the missing organs. Velthar wanted to understand the mechanism. How did human cells know what to do? How did they coordinate such complex rebuilding without external guidance? He spent hours reviewing medical texts about human biology, downloaded files from Earth's medical databases, and consulted with Yuna whenever she had time. The answer was both simple and complicated. Human bodies carried instructions in every cell. When tissue was damaged, chemical signals spread through the area. These signals told different cell types what to do. Some cells cleaned up debris. Others built new blood vessels. Still others laid down the framework for organ regeneration. All of this happened automatically, controlled by systems that had evolved over millions of years. On the third day, Jiwoo was alert enough to complain properly. He said the medical bay was boring. He wanted to know when he could return to duty. His teammates visited regularly, bringing him human food from the station's market. Velthar watched Jiwoo eat solid food just 3 days after receiving a wound that should have killed him instantly. The human chewed carefully, mindful of his damaged stomach, but he kept the food down without difficulty. The wound continued to close. Each day brought visible progress. The hole that had been the size of Velthar's fist was now barely the size of his thumb. New skin was forming at the edges, slowly creeping inward to cover the regenerating tissue beneath. The scabs fell away naturally, revealing pink, healthy skin underneath. Minsu asked the question that Velthar had been wondering about for days. If humans could heal like this naturally, why did they need doctors at all? Why not just let their bodies fix themselves? Yuna's answer was practical. Human healing was impressive but not perfect. They could recover from terrible injuries, yes, but the process was slow and painful. They could survive infections, but sometimes those infections won. They could regrow tissue, but sometimes that tissue healed incorrectly, causing problems later. Doctors helped guide the healing, prevented complications, managed pain, and intervened when the body's efforts were not enough. Plus, Yuna added with a slight smile, humans were not very good at resting. If left unsupervised, Jiwoo would probably try to return to combat training within a week. He needed someone to force him to stay in bed and let his body complete the healing process properly. By the end of the first week, Velthar had documented everything in exhaustive detail. He had recordings of the entire healing process, tissue samples at various stages, blood work tracking the changes in cell counts and chemical markers. He had enough data to write 12 research papers. But more importantly, he had witnessed something that changed his understanding of biology itself. Life was more resilient than he had believed possible. The human body was not elegant or efficient like Xylothian physiology. It was messy, aggressive, and overwhelming in its responses. But it worked. It kept Jiwoo alive when every medical principle said he should have died. Velthar stood beside the examination table, watching Jiwoo sleep peacefully. The young mercenary's breathing was steady and strong. His fever had broken. His wound had shrunk to a small opening that would probably close completely within another week. Against all odds and logic, the human had survived. Minsu came to stand beside him. The younger doctor spoke quietly, expressing the same awe that Velthar felt. They had been taught that biology followed strict rules, that certain injuries were fatal, that the body had clear limits. Humans seemed to have missed those lessons entirely. Belthar nodded slowly. His 4 eyes reflected the soft blue light of the medical bay. He thought about all the species he had treated over 3 decades. Each one had evolved to fit their environment. Each one had developed traits that helped them survive. But none had come from a world as hostile as Earth. None had needed to evolve such extreme survival mechanisms. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest or the smartest, but they might be the hardest to kill, and that Velthar was beginning to understand made them very formidable indeed. Dr. Velthar could not stop thinking about Ji-Woo Kim's recovery. Even when he treated other patients, part of his mind remained focused on the impossible healing he had witnessed. He found himself reviewing the recorded data late into the night cycles, watching the tissue regeneration in slow motion, trying to understand the biological mechanisms that made it possible. On the 10th day after the injury, Velthar invited Dr. Min-Soo Choi to join him in a comprehensive analysis. They gathered in one of the research labs, surrounded by holographic displays showing cross-sections of human anatomy. Velthar wanted to understand not just what had happened to Ji-Woo, but why it was possible. What made human biology so different from every other species he knew? They started with the basics, human blood clotting factors. Velthar pulled up comparative data from the Galactic Medical Database. Most species had clotting mechanisms that activated slowly and carefully. Too much clotting could cause dangerous blockages in blood vessels. The body needed to balance the need to stop bleeding against the risk of creating clots that could travel to vital organs. Humans had apparently decided that caution was for other species. Human blood carried multiple redundant clotting systems. When injury occurred, all of them activated at once. The result was rapid, aggressive clot formation that could seal even major wounds within minutes. Yes, this increased the risk of dangerous clots. But on a planet full of predators with sharp teeth and claws, fast clotting was more important than perfect clotting. Min-Soo pointed out another fascinating detail. Human blood also contained systems to break down clots once they were no longer needed. The body could create clots rapidly to stop bleeding, then dissolve them carefully to restore normal blood flow. It was like having both emergency brakes and careful steering in the same vehicle. Next, they examined the immune response. Velthar had been shocked by the white blood cell counts during Ji-Woo's recovery. Min-Soo helped him dig deeper into human immunology, and what they found was equally remarkable and terrifying. Human immune systems operated on a principle of overwhelming force. When the body detected injury or infection, it sent massive numbers of white blood cells to the site. These cells killed bacteria, destroyed damaged tissue, and cleared away debris. The process was incredibly effective, but also incredibly violent. It was less like careful surgery and more like demolition followed by reconstruction. Dr. Yuna Park joined them in the lab during her break. Velthar asked her about the inflammatory response he had observed. The swelling, the heat, the redness. In most species, such intense inflammation indicated serious problems. In humans, it seemed to be standard procedure. Yuna explained that inflammation was a feature, not a bug. When tissue was damaged, the body increased blood flow to the area. This brought more oxygen, more nutrients, and more immune cells. The increased blood flow caused the heat and redness. The fluid accumulation caused the swelling. It was uncomfortable, yes, but it created the optimal environment for healing. The fever response was similar. Most species tried to maintain stable body temperature at all costs. Humans deliberately raised their temperature when fighting infections or healing injuries. The higher temperature made their immune cells work faster and made it harder for bacteria to survive. It was risky because excessive heat could damage the brain, but the benefits outweighed the risks. Min-Soo brought up another puzzling observation. Ji-Woo had survived the destruction of several vital organs. How was that possible? In Xylothian physiology, each organ had a specific function. Lose the liver and you could not process toxins. Lose the stomach and you could not digest food. Yet Ji-Woo had lost significant portions of both organs and remained functional. Yuna pulled up a diagram of human organ systems. She showed them something remarkable. Many human organs had excess capacity built in. Humans could survive with only 1 kidney when they were born with 2. They could lose significant portions of their liver and the remaining tissue would regenerate. Their lungs had extra volume beyond what they needed for normal breathing. This redundancy meant that humans could sustain serious organ damage and continue functioning. Their bodies could reroute blood flow around damaged areas. They could compensate for lost organ function using other systems. It was inefficient from an engineering standpoint, but incredibly effective for survival. Velthar asked about the tissue regeneration itself. How did human cells know how to rebuild complex organs? Most species could heal minor cuts, but regenerating lost tissue required expensive medical equipment and specialized treatments. Jiwoo's body had done it naturally. The answer involved stem cells. Yuna explained that human bodies contained cells that could transform into different tissue types. When injury occurred, these stem cells activated and migrated to the damaged area. They received chemical signals that told them what kind of tissue to become. Need liver cells? The stem cells became liver cells. Need blood vessels? They became blood vessel walls. The process was not perfect. Scar tissue often formed instead of exact replicas of the original tissue, but it was functional, and most importantly, it happened automatically without any external intervention. As they talked, Velthar began to see the pattern. Every aspect of human healing was aggressive, redundant, and overwhelming. Their bodies did not trust subtle responses. They threw every resource at the problem and sorted it out later. It was the biological equivalent of using a hammer to solve every problem, but it worked remarkably well. Minsu wondered aloud about the evolutionary pressures that created such extreme adaptations. What kind of planet produced creatures like this? Yuna's expression grew thoughtful. She told them about Earth, a planet where the weather could swing from freezing to scorching within hours, where hundreds of thousands of species competed for resources, where diseases and parasites evolved almost as fast as immune systems could adapt to them, where predators hunted in packs and prey animals developed elaborate defenses. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters. They could not run as fast as prey animals, but they could run for hours without stopping. They could not fight as well as large predators, but they could coordinate in groups and use tools. They were not the biggest or strongest or fastest, but they could survive injuries that would kill their competitors. Every advantage came with a cost. The aggressive immune system sometimes attacked the body's own tissues, causing autoimmune diseases. The rapid clotting sometimes created dangerous blockages. The fever response sometimes went too high and caused brain damage. But on average, across the population, these traits helped more than they hurt. Velthar looked at the data displays surrounding them. Charts of cell growth rates, images of tissue regeneration, graphs of immune response curves. All of it painted a picture of a species that evolution had forged in a brutal crucible. Humans were not designed for elegance or efficiency. They were designed to survive. Minsu asked if there were other human traits they should know about. Yuna smiled and began listing them. Humans could digest a wide variety of foods, even some that were toxic to other species. They could adapt to different gravity levels relatively quickly. Their eyes could adjust to various light levels. They could survive in temperature ranges that would kill most species. Oh, and they had remarkable pain tolerance. They could function through injuries that would incapacitate other species. Their brains had systems to suppress pain signals during emergencies, allowing them to keep moving even when seriously hurt. This was how Jiwoo had continued fighting for 2 minutes after being shot. Velthar shook his head in amazement. Every answer led to more questions. Every explanation revealed another layer of complexity. He had thought he understood biology, but humans challenged everything he knew. They were walking contradictions. Fragile yet resilient, simple yet complicated, weak yet incredibly hard to kill. As the research session ended, Velthar made a decision. He would compile all of this information and present it to the Galactic Medical Council. Other doctors needed to understand human biology better. If humans were spreading across the galaxy as explorers and mercenaries, medical personnel everywhere would encounter them eventually. They needed to know that human patients would surprise them, defy expectations, and survive against all odds. Minsu and Yuna agreed to help him prepare the presentation. It would take time to organize all the data properly, but it would be worth it. Knowledge like this could save lives and prevent misunderstandings. It might even inspire new medical treatments for other species based on human healing mechanisms. Velthar returned to the medical bay to check on Jiwoo one more time before the night cycle. The human was sitting up in bed, playing a game on his handheld device. The wound had closed completely now, leaving only a pink scar. In less than 2 weeks, Jiwoo had gone from dying to nearly healthy. It still seemed impossible, but Velthar had the data to prove it happened. Humans were remarkable. Terrifying in their resilience, but remarkable, and Velthar was grateful for the chance to study them. The amphitheater of the Galactic Medical Council was impressive. Rows of seats curved upward in a perfect semicircle, each position equipped with translation devices and holographic displays. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered for the quarterly medical symposium. Dr. Velthar stood at the center podium, his 4 eyes scanning the assembled physicians and researchers. He had never been this nervous before a presentation. His hands trembled slightly as he activated the main display screen behind him. The title of his presentation appeared in multiple languages: Understanding Human Regenerative Capabilities. Below it, a medical scan of Jiwoo Kim's injury rotated slowly, showing the massive plasma wound from multiple angles. Dr. Yuna Park sat in the front row, along with several other human medical representatives. Dr. Tae-hyun Lee, a prominent human surgeon, gave Velthar an encouraging nod. Commander Da-un Shin, who had brought Jiwoo to the medical bay weeks ago, sat beside them in full dress uniform. She had been invited to provide context about the injury circumstances. Velthar began his presentation with the basic facts. He described Jiwoo's arrival at the medical bay, the extent of the injuries, and his initial assessment that the patient was beyond saving. The display showed vital signs and scanner readouts from those first critical minutes. Several audience members made sounds of dismay or disbelief. A Centaurian physician raised a limb to ask if the translation was correct. Surely no one could survive such trauma, but Jiwoo had survived. Velthar walked the audience through each stage of the recovery process. He showed time-lapse recordings of the wound healing over 2 weeks, the aggressive clot formation, the intense inflammatory response, the rapid tissue regeneration. Each stage was documented with scanner data, tissue samples, and detailed measurements. The amphitheater grew quiet as the implications sank in. This was not an isolated case or a fluke. This was normal human biology. Any human patient might demonstrate similar capabilities when seriously injured. Velthar moved to the next section of his presentation. He explained the evolutionary context. Earth was what xenobiologists classified as a Class 4 death world: high predator diversity, extreme climate variations, dense disease load, and frequent natural disasters. Life on Earth had to be tough, or it did not survive long enough to reproduce. Humans evolved in this hostile environment. Every aspect of their biology reflected the brutal selection pressures they faced. They developed immune systems that could fight off thousands of different pathogens. They evolved redundant organ systems that allowed them to function even with serious damage. They created healing mechanisms that prioritized speed and effectiveness over elegance. The display showed comparative data: human clotting speed versus 17 other species, human white blood cell mobilization rates versus the galactic average, human pain tolerance measured against standardized scales. In every category related to surviving injury, humans were statistical outliers. Dr. Min-Soo Choi, who had co-authored the presentation, took over to explain the medical implications. Doctors treating human patients needed to adjust their expectations. What looked like fatal injuries might be survivable. What seemed like dangerous fever might be therapeutic. What appeared to be excessive inflammation might be normal healing, but the reverse was also true. Human patients were notoriously bad at resting and following medical advice. Their high pain tolerance meant they often underestimated their injuries. Their body's ability to function through serious damage meant they would try to return to normal activities too quickly. Doctors needed to be firm about enforcing recovery periods even when the patient felt fine. A Shard-born physician asked about human weaknesses. Surely they had vulnerabilities? Min-Soo nodded and explained that human biology had trade-offs like any other species. Their aggressive immune systems sometimes attacked their own bodies, causing autoimmune diseases. Their rapid clotting could create dangerous blockages in blood vessels. Their high metabolism meant they needed frequent food and water. Additionally, human bones were relatively fragile compared to some species. Their skin offered minimal protection against environmental hazards. They required narrow temperature ranges for long-term survival. They were not invincible, just remarkably good at surviving the specific threats their evolution had prepared them for. Dr. Tae-hyun Lee stood to add some context from the human medical perspective. He explained that Earth doctors had centuries of experience managing human healing responses. They had developed techniques to enhance natural healing, suppress excessive inflammation when necessary, and prevent complications from overactive immune systems. This knowledge was being compiled into medical guidelines for non-human physicians. Training programs were being developed. Human medical advisors were available for consultation on difficult cases. The goal was to ensure that humans received appropriate care anywhere in the galaxy, not just from human doctors. Commander Da-Un Shin provided the final piece of context. She described the incident that had injured Jiwoo. The ambush, the firefight, and most importantly, Jiwoo's actions after being shot. He had continued fighting, coordinating his squad and ensuring their escape before allowing himself to collapse. This was not unusual for human soldiers and mercenaries. Their ability to function through injuries made them incredibly effective in combat situations. They could keep fighting when other species would be incapacitated. They could endure conditions that would break others. It was why human security personnel and military contractors were in high demand across the galaxy. But Da-Un also emphasized the psychological aspect. Humans were not fearless. They felt pain and fear like anyone else, but they had cultural traits that complemented their biological advantages. Concepts like duty, honor, and protecting others. These social adaptations worked together with their physical resilience to create remarkably determined fighters. The question period lasted over an hour. Physicians asked about specific scenarios. Researchers wanted access to the raw data. Medical equipment manufacturers inquired about whether human-specific treatment devices would be needed. Velthar and his co-presenters answered each question thoroughly, drawing on their combined expertise. One question stood out. A young Xylothian medical student asked if studying human biology might lead to treatments that could help other species. Could human healing mechanisms be replicated or adapted? Yuna answered carefully. Research was ongoing. Some human medical techniques could be applied to other species with modifications. Certain drugs and treatments developed for humans showed promise in cross-species applications. But biological systems were complex and interconnected. You could not simply transplant one trait without considering how it affected everything else. However, understanding human healing might inspire new approaches to treating other species. If nothing else, it expanded what doctors thought was possible. It challenged assumptions about injury severity and recovery timelines. Sometimes the best medical advances came from studying how different species solved the same problems in different ways. As the presentation concluded, Velthar felt a sense of satisfaction. He had communicated something important to the medical community. Doctors across the galaxy would now have better information about treating human patients. Misunderstandings would be prevented. Lives might be saved. But more than that, he had shared his wonder and fascination with human biology. He had shown his colleagues what he had learned through treating Jiwoo, that humans were remarkable not because they were better than other species, but because they were different in ways that revealed new possibilities. After the symposium, several physicians approached Velthar with follow-up questions. Research partnerships were proposed. Teaching opportunities were discussed. Minsu was practically glowing with excitement about the positive reception. Even Velthar, usually reserved in his emotions, felt genuinely pleased with the outcome. Yuna congratulated him on an excellent presentation. She mentioned that Jiwoo had wanted to attend but was currently on assignment in another system. He had sent a message, though, thanking Velthar for the excellent care and for not giving up on him even when the database said he should be dead. Velthar appreciated the sentiment. He had not given up on Jiwoo, but honestly, he had been prepared to fail. The human's own biology had done most of the work. Velthar had simply provided support and documentation. Still, it felt good to know his patient had recovered completely and returned to active duty. It validated everything Velthar had learned and shared. Humans were survivors. They had evolved to endure. And now the galaxy's medical community understood that a little better. As Velthar left the amphitheater, he thought about how one patient had changed his entire perspective on medicine. He had spent 32 years learning the rules of biology. Jiwoo Kim had taught him that some species wrote their own rules, and sometimes those rules were more effective than anything in the textbooks. 3 months had passed since Dr. Velthar's presentation to the Galactic Medical Council. The medical bay of the Asclepius Prime had returned to its normal routine. But something had changed for Velthar himself. He found himself paying closer attention to human patients, looking for the patterns he had learned from Jiwoo's case. He saw them everywhere once he knew what to look for. A human construction worker had arrived 2 weeks ago with a severe burn across her shoulder and back. The injury would have required extensive regeneration therapy for most species, keeping them hospitalized for months. The human woman, whose name was Heejin Ko, had healed enough to return to light duty within 10 days. Her body had shed the damaged skin and grown new tissue with impressive efficiency. Velthar had documented the case carefully. Hyejin's recovery followed the same patterns he had observed with Jiwoo. Aggressive inflammation, rapid tissue generation, uncomfortable but effective healing. She had complained about the itching as new skin formed, a sensation that apparently drove humans crazy, but indicated proper healing. Today, Jiwoo Kim himself was scheduled to visit the medical bay for a follow-up examination. Velthar had requested it, wanting to see the long-term results of the healing process. The appointment was scheduled for mid-afternoon, between Velthar's other duties. When Jiwoo arrived, he looked completely healthy. He moved with easy confidence, showing no sign of the injury that should have killed him. He greeted Velthar with a warm smile and a human handshake, which the Xylothian doctor had learned to accept gracefully, despite the strange custom. The examination was thorough. Velthar scanned the site of the old injury with every diagnostic device available. The results were remarkable. The wound had healed completely, leaving only a faint scar. Internally, the regenerated tissue functioned normally. Jiwoo's liver had regrown to nearly full size. His stomach had repaired itself. The blood vessels had rerouted and rebuilt. Velthar asked about any lingering effects or problems. Jiwoo admitted that sometimes the scar tissue felt tight when he stretched certain ways. Occasionally, he experienced mild digestive discomfort, probably because his stomach had not regenerated with perfect accuracy. But these were minor inconveniences, not disabilities. He had returned to full combat duty 6 weeks ago and had completed 2 missions without issues. Dr. Min-Soo Choi joined them for part of the examination. He wanted to see the results for himself, having been involved in the initial treatment and research. Min-Soo asked Jiwoo if he had any advice for doctors treating injured humans. The question made Jiwoo think for a moment. Jiwoo suggested that doctors should trust human patients when they said they felt okay. Humans had good instincts about their own bodies. They knew when something was seriously wrong versus when it just hurt. Of course, he admitted with a laugh. Humans were also stubborn about admitting when they needed rest, so doctors should probably verify those instincts with actual medical tests. He also mentioned that human psychology played a big role in recovery. Humans healed better when they felt useful and had goals to work toward. Being confined to bed for too long made them depressed and anxious, which actually slowed healing. Light activity, as soon as it was safe, helped both their mental state and their physical recovery. Velthar found this information valuable. It aligned with what he had observed but added the patient's perspective. He made notes to include this in his ongoing research documentation. After the examination concluded, Jiwoo mentioned that he had heard about Velthar's presentation to the medical council. Several of his human colleagues in the mercenary community had received better treatment at various stations, because doctors now understood human healing better. The word had spread through unofficial channels that Velthar was the doctor who had figured it out and shared the knowledge. Velthar felt a quiet satisfaction at this news. His goal had been to improve medical care for humans across the galaxy. Knowing it was actually working made the effort worthwhile. He mentioned that he had been contacted by several medical schools asking if he would teach seminars on xenobiology, specifically about treating human patients. Jiwoo encouraged him to accept. Humans were spreading throughout the galaxy as traders, explorers, soldiers, and settlers. More doctors would encounter human patients every year. Better education meant better outcomes for everyone. Plus, Jiwoo added, it would help reduce the misconception that humans were fragile because they came from a paradise world. Earth was no paradise, and humans were definitely not fragile. As they talked, Dr. Yuna Park arrived to join them. She had been coordinating with Velthar on developing the educational materials for other physicians. The project had grown beyond what either of them initially expected. They now had a comprehensive database of human medical cases, treatment protocols, and biological information. Una suggested they might want to collaborate on a research paper about comparative healing mechanisms across species. The human case could serve as one example, but studying other species with unusual healing abilities would provide valuable insights. Some species regenerated lost limbs. Others could survive complete organ replacement. Each had evolved different solutions to the same fundamental problem of repairing damage. Belthar agreed immediately. The idea excited him. He had always been curious about how different species adapted to their environments. This would be a chance to explore that curiosity in a systematic way, while contributing to medical knowledge. Min Su volunteered to help with the research. He had been considering specializing in xenobiology anyway. Working on this project would give him valuable experience and credibility in the field. Plus, he admitted, studying how different species healed was genuinely fascinating. The conversation eventually shifted to lighter topics. Jiwoo told them about his recent missions, carefully avoiding classified details but sharing the general experiences. He had visited 3 different systems, met dozens of alien species, and confirmed that humans were considered somewhat crazy by most of the galaxy. Apparently, word had spread about how humans approached dangerous situations. They volunteered for risky jobs. They laughed in the face of danger. They had a strange tendency to befriend anything, even species that others found terrifying. One of Jiwoo's squad mates had somehow convinced a predatory void hunter to join them for drinks. The void hunter had been confused but pleased by the gesture. Una explained that this was another adaptation from Earth. Humans had evolved as social creatures who formed alliances and built communities. They instinctively tried to make friends because cooperation improved survival odds. Even their relationship with danger was a calculated risk. They had learned that sometimes the best defense was to face threats directly, rather than hiding from them. Belthar listened to all of this with growing appreciation for the complexity of human nature. Their biology was impressive, but it was only part of the story. Their psychology, culture, and social structures all worked together to create a species that was uniquely adapted to survive and thrive in challenging environments. As the visit concluded, Jiwoo thanked Belthar again for not giving up on him that first day. He knew the medical database had said he should die. He appreciated that Belthar had treated him anyway, documenting everything and learning from the experience. That dedication had helped other humans receive better care. Belthar accepted the thanks graciously. He admitted that Jiwoo had taught him as much as he had helped Jiwoo. The experience had made him a better doctor and a better researcher. It had reminded him why he had chosen medicine in the first place. The desire to understand life in all its varied forms and help beings survive and thrive. After Jiwoo left, Belthar stood in the quiet medical bay and reflected on how much had changed. 3 months ago, he had watched a human patient survive an impossible injury. That single case had transformed his understanding of biology and medicine. It had led to presentations, partnerships, and new research directions. But more importantly, it had reminded him of something essential about medicine. Every patient, regardless of species, had the potential to surprise you. Biology was not a rigid set of rules. It was a flexible, adaptive, creative force. Species evolved in countless different ways to solve the same basic challenges of survival. Humans were a perfect example of this principle. They had evolved on a brutal world and developed brutal solutions. They healed aggressively, fought tenaciously, and refused to die quietly. These traits made them remarkable survivors and formidable individuals. Belthar returned to his other duties with renewed purpose. He had patients to treat, research to conduct, and knowledge to share. And now, thanks to Jiwoo Kim and the lessons learned from one impossible recovery, he had a better understanding of what was truly possible. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders. Humans were just one example of the incredible diversity of life. But they were a particularly instructive example. They reminded everyone that survival was not about following the rules. It was about adapting, persisting, and refusing to give up even when the odds said you should. Belthar smiled to himself, a gesture humans had taught him. He looked forward to continuing his work and learning more about the remarkable species that shared the galaxy with him. Each one had stories to tell and lessons to teach.